Greater Than 0% is a 501c3 nonprofit that's on a mission to share stories of organizations from around the world that are changing lives. We have weekly episodes featuring amazing nonprofits and monthly episodes interviewing top business executives. You can find us at gtzp.org on your preferred streaming or social media platforms.
Well, thanks everybody for tuning into this episode. Today's another special interview where we have two people from the organization. So in this episode, we're interviewing Patrick Keenan-Devlin, who's the Executive Director and Youth Defense Attorney, and Kristen Kennard, who's a Deputy Director and Director of Social Work. So Patrick and Kristen, thank you so much for your time today. Really excited to hear more about the James Moran Center for Youth Advocacy and dive deep into what you're doing and what you've done and what the future has to hold for you all. So thank you both for your time today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
All right. So we always like to start by hearing the mission of the organization. So I don't know who would be best to answer that, but what is the mission of Moran Center for Youth Advocacy?
I'd be happy to take that, Joseph. So the James B. Moran Center for Youth Advocacy provides community-based legal, mental health, and restorative services for youth and families. And our approach is holistic, healing-centered, and client-driven. And our work advances the vision of a more just, racially equitable, and restorative society at the local, regional, and state levels. So that's our mission statement.
All right. Well, perfect. We'll get into the how and how you're actually making that come to life. But before we do, why both of you? Why is this an organization that you guys are spending your very precious time and passions towards?
Sure. So I'd just like to start by kind of giving a trigger warning when we talk about the history of the Moran Center and the difficult topics and difficult things that a lot of our clients go through. There are some unavoidable topics such as suicide, police brutality, and violence. So I did just want to give that off of the top so people kind of knew some of the things that we would be talking about to really tell our story and our client stories. So I can start with why Moran Center for me. So I started here a little over 14 years ago as a grad school student. And I came to this work because when I was younger, in middle school to be exact, I lost a very close person to me to suicide. And I realized at a really young age that mental health was something that was really important to me and that I felt really passionate about trying to. Lost him, that kind of really, really triggered things for me. And I also realized at a young age how much privilege I had. And I went to a very diverse school and my community was very diverse. And I just saw how differently people were treated based on the color of their skin, based on disabilities. And so combining those two things together and how oftentimes that led to voices not being heard and potential police interactions when it wasn't happening to people who looked like me. I was really passionate about those two things, mental health and trying to help in those arenas. And so when I heard about the Moran Center, which it was not the Moran Center then, Patrick will talk a little bit about that, as a grad school internship opportunity, it was exactly where I wanted to be. And I'm still here today because of the work that we do, and because of our clients. They're incredible people, and that's what keeps me sticking around here and doing everything that I can to make sure their voices are heard.
Awesome. Thank you for that background and sharing that. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Well, Joseph, my why is my brother Tim. So my brother Tim has autism, and I am younger than my brother. And I witnessed, as the younger sibling, my parents advocate zealously for my brother. And very often, despite their zealousness, institutions, communities, family members be compelled to institutionalize him, to shutter him away, because we as a people are really bothered by difference, troubled by it, made uncomfortable by it. And as I entered into the practice of law, I saw so many people in our community who were otherized and institutionalized, not just people with disabilities, but our Black brothers and sisters, our brown brothers and sisters, children with learning differences. And so there's just so many ways our country has figured out how to otherize and exclude people. And the core vision of the Moran Center is to stem all of those pipelines of oppression, those instruments of exclusion, because we are all better when we all do better, and we are all better when we are in community with one another. And the work of the Moran Center, yes, it is an integrated legal, mental health, and restorative organization, but at its core, it is a community building organization. We value relationships more than anything else, and it is relationships that keep us together, distance us from the impulse of exclusion.
Awesome. Well, I think this is a perfect precursor to diving into the organization and all the amazing things that you guys are doing, and what's fueling you guys, your passions. So I feel like there are a lot of different aspects of the organization about Moran Center, from legal services to mental health services to restorative services. Were those kind of three pillars there from the start, or was there an initial different focus from the beginning? And you guys just realized, being in the community, that there's so many other aspects that are important to address.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate Kristen giving a trigger warning at the beginning of our talk, because our founding is really a tragic story, and could probably be really unsettling for some of your viewers, Joseph. There was a young man in our community. His name was John Cox. He was 19 years old in 1971. And he discovered his 2-year-old child unresponsive. He called for emergency services. Emergency services shows up. They accuse John of murdering his young child, his 2-year-old child. His name was Josiah. And they pull him into custody. They don't tell him anything about his son. They don't give him any access to medical care, legal services, his family. He's not even told about what happened to his son. And he ultimately attempted suicide in his jail cell. John was then pulled into emergency services and taken to Evanston Hospital. At Evanston Hospital, in a coma, his family was then told that they likely could not afford his medical care, and so they recommended having John transferred from Evanston Hospital to the county hospital, which is our public health care system. The family, utterly concerned about bankruptcy, because so many Americans in this country, due to healthcare and healthcare costs, have experienced bankruptcy, and that's true today, and it was true in 1971. So they agreed to have John, in a coma again, transferred from Evanston Hospital to county hospital. Then county hospital had a gurney waiting for John to take him out the back door to the jail hospital, which is called Cermak. And upon that final transfer, John died. At the time, Alderman James B. Moran was on the Evanston City Council, along with Alderman Brew Alexander. And the two of them investigated what happened. They investigated the courts, they investigated the public defender's office, they investigated the hospitals, they investigated the police, and they ultimately found great injustices. And one of the recommendations that they came up with was a community-based, integrated defense office for young people. And so in 1972, our doors were officially opened as the Evanston Community Defender Project. And we operated as a project, really a pilot, an experiment. Could you provide free indigent defense services in a community with integrated social work services, mental health services, and could it be successful? And so it was a pilot project from 1972 to 1976. And then Jimmy Carter was elected president, and Jimmy Carter believed in this model of community-based defense services, and so invested huge sums of money from the Department of Justice in building Evanston Community Defender projects all over the region and the United States. And so then we became the Evanston Community Defender Office in 1976, and we were part of a collective of other community-based defense organizations. Then the story goes that Ronald Reagan was elected in 1980, and all the funding dried up. And so the city of Evanston had to make a choice. Do we value community-based defense services for children or not? And they ultimately decided that they did. And so city government stepped up and funded the Evanston Community Defender Office. And we fully incorporated it as a freestanding nonprofit in 1981. So that's our backstory. And you see even how our backstory is connected to presidential politics. I mean, it's kind of bizarre that a little organization is tied into national politics like that, but it is true. And what I always say is Moran Center started in the muck of the criminal legal system. And we did that for 29 years. Alderman Moran then became Judge Moran. Jimmy Carter, going back to Jimmy Carter, nominated him to the federal bench. And when he died in 2009, we had to think, what do we do now that our founder is gone? How do we move on? How do we preserve his legacy? And in really thinking about that, we saw so many ways that we as lawyers and social workers could be doing so much more for our community. And so now we help people who are being funneled out of the broken criminal legal system to clear their criminal records. We now try as lawyers and social workers to keep children out of the broken criminal legal system by representing them in school, by representing them in special education and school discipline proceedings to stem the school to prison pipeline. We then represent families with children in our schools who are being destabilized by so many economic pressures and instruments of oppression to stabilize families so children can stay in school, stay in our community, and succeed. And then most recently, we have envisioned building a restorative community, which is part of our Get Out of Business plan. Every nonprofit should have one. And we really believe that if we do the work of building community, building relationships, teaching people how to resolve conflict without relying on systems with a capital S, we can drive ourselves out of business. So that's our founding story, and then that's where we are today.
Yeah, wow. For people that are not familiar with community-based defense organizations or what it is and how it compares to what is currently or more commonly popularized and being used, could you do a difference, like a 101 for us?
Sure. So Gideon versus Wainwright was the seminal case decided by the U.S. Supreme Court, which found that people are owed defense services, even if they are indigent, even if they are poor. And that case really revolutionized the criminal legal system. And different states, different jurisdictions have approached Gideon in different ways. So, for example, in the state of New York, if you go to New York City, there is no public defense system. It is purely contractual. Legal aid organizations step up and represent folks that are appointed by the court. You then have our system here in Cook County, home of the city of Chicago. We have a publicly funded public defense organization. And we see ourselves in part, not in competition with it, in that we are able to experiment on a really local level, really innovative and creative ways of providing public defense, but also providing integrated services within our model. And I'm so excited. The Public Defender's Office of Cook County, Sharon Mitchell, who's the Cook County Public Defender, the Cook County Public Defender, announced recently that next year, the Public Defender's Office is going to be launching community-based offices, modeling the office after the Moran Center. And you couldn't find a higher compliment that our brothers and sisters at the Cook County Public Defender's Office see the value of our model and are attempting to replicate it in a public space, which is really where it should be.
Yeah. Now, I'm sure that there's a lot of analysis that went into the decision to replicate the model. So what about the model is so valuable and different, or what does it provide above and beyond that deserves to be replicated?
Sure. So I think, our model is incredibly unique because of the access being in the community it gives to our clients and their families, and other community organizations. We all know that this holistic wraparound model is key to really helping our clients and their families get to where they want to be. It can't all be done in one place. We have to collaborate and work together. So we have incredibly close partnerships with Evanston does have a wealth of resources, and a lot of times people are working in silos. And so we really focus on trying to collaborate with our partners so that we can serve our families as best as one they deserve, but also, then they're meeting different people. They're having access to services in a way that they've been kind of barred from access in the past, or there's been barriers to accessing those resources. And so we really try to help families get involved with our partner organizations. But the other really unique thing is we have the ability to see our clients, I think, more and in a different way than the typical public defense system has, because they are overloaded with cases, because they're not in the community. And so with the access to the social work services and restorative services, we are out on the streets. We are, in the neighborhoods. We are at the community centers, so that even if they are not a client of the Moran Center, that they know us. And if something does happen and they need to reach out, they already have some sort of trust built and some sort of rapport built there. And we really do everything that we can to highlight our clients' voices and what they are saying that they need, not what we think that they need. And that's really how all the programs that Patrick talked about over time that we've developed beyond just the criminal defense have come from our client voices, and that gap being in the community and us trying to fill that so that people had somewhere to go to do that. So it really just gives us better access to our clients, and our clients better access to the resources and the supports that they deserve.
Yeah, a very common word that y'all have said throughout this interview is restorative. So again, 101 question for those who are not too familiar with what restorative justice is specifically. What is restorative justice, and what does it mean to Moran Center, and how are you guys using it as a method to stem that school to prison pipeline that you mentioned?
So I can start with that. So justice really to us, and Patrick said this a little bit in the beginning, it comes down to relationships. And so when in all of the different areas of law that we're working in, and just from being out in the community, you see maybe a harm that was caused, right? And that can look like somebody broke the law, somebody hurt somebody in a relationship. It can look in all different ways. And the way that we look at that now with using a restorative lens is to really look at what is the need that was identified by that harm, right? A harm was caused. What are the needs that are there? Why did that happen? And how do we then build relationships with one another, be in relation with each other, to repair that harm in a way that isn't just punitive, but that will help all parties feel better about how we move forward, and then hopefully be in relationship with each other and understand each other. I think, one of the biggest things that we always, talk about is that if you really know somebody, it is very hard to dislike them. And so it is, right, getting to know each other, getting out in the community, and building those relationships so that people can, even if they cannot relate, there's some empathy built there and there is some compassion built there. And we are really working to build those relationships and bring a community together. And one of the ways, and you said it, that we are really trying to do that within schools, our restorative justice team, which is part of our Roger Pascal Restorative Justice Initiative. We are in the schools, our team, which is now we have 2 staff members, but we've also built this phenomenal team of community peace builders, which are young people who maybe used to receive our services. They're young people in our community who understand kind of what is going on. And then we also have a group of elders that they work with that are really well known in the community and loved. And they are going into the schools and meeting with now hundreds of students to train them in restorative practices and circle keeping, and really getting them to a spot where then they can go out and facilitate circles, because it has been their their idea, their dreams, what they want their school to look like. And so we're kind of there to guide them. Our restorative team is here to guide them, but it's these young people who are really taking the reins and going through and getting trained and facilitating circles and teaching their peers about what it means to be restorative, and teaching their administrators and their teachers and, the people in the school how we can function in a different way that isn't just punitive.
Yeah, that's really cool. I've never heard of using the youth as the mechanism of training and then sharing that training. I've always usually heard it like administration and staff versus using the youth as that addition to grow, kind of to do that spiderweb approach. I'd love if you could share an example of maybe a youth that has gone through the circle training, the restorative justice practices, and what the outcome was for them. Maybe somebody that perpetrated a crime or did something, and what was their experience going through in the result versus if they had gone through the normal classic route. Because I think that example will paint a really good picture for people who've never heard of what the circle training process is like, or restorative justice, of what is this new method versus what is the hopefully old way soon.
Well, I can give an example. Obviously, with keeping confidentiality, I'm going to talk a little more broad. But
Yes.
So we had a young man who was arrested for stealing from a bank. He came to us, and obviously through the social work services, I learned a lot about what that young man had been through, a lot about kind of his cognitive state and developmentally where he was at. And he ultimately there was somebody older than him who was manipulating him in certain ways, and he made the choice, and he did what he was accused of doing, but there was a lot more to that. And so with our restorative justice manager and our our attorney for adults, he was 19 at the time, and myself, we approached both the police officers who were involved in the arrest as well as the bank that was involved. And we were able to teach them a little bit about what restorative practices were and what they look like, and ask for them to participate in a circle in kind of getting to know this young man a little bit more, and learning more about his story and where he's coming from, to see if there was a different solution than going into the courts, because it would have changed his entire life to have that on his record as an adult. So after a little bit of education, the bank agreed, and the officer said that if the bank agreed, then they agreed. And so we were able to, our restorative justice team does a lot of pre-conferencing to make sure that it's a safe space. So they met with the bank without the client. They met with the client without the bank, and just seeing where everybody is at and learning more. And then we were able to bring everybody together to meet, and they got to see this young man for who he was, for the things that he had been through, for the remorse that he had for the mistake that he made. And they saw what we saw, luckily, and were able to get to know him. And ultimately were able to create a repair of harm agreement that will not ruin his life, that kept him out of the system, that allowed him he did community service. They wanted him to continue doing therapy with me, which he was already completely engaged in and was wonderful about participating in. And he was able to do that for 6 months, and the charges were dropped. And that also meant much in his life, right? Like a second chance, and the ability to show who he was, and changed his opinion in some ways, right, about some of the institutions and the places that have harmed him and his family in the past. So it was really powerful. And now, he's thriving, and he moved to California, and he has his own apartment, and he's doing great. And we talk to him all the time still. And ongoing, he talks about what a life-changing thing that was for him, and how he tries to put some of the things he's learned there. He wasn't trained as a circle keeper, but he got to participate, in something that was really life-changing for him. And so he tries to use that in his own life when there's conflict, when you can really use it anywhere. So that's one example.
Yeah, no, that's such a great example.
Joseph, in listening to Kristen,
go ahead.
In listening to Kristen, I had a thought that I I never have before, but I feel compelled to share it, which is, I really appreciate, Joseph, that you ask your listeners to think about what they could do to advance whatever mission you're highlighting as part of your podcast. And I really do think this is something we can do. So if you are a survivor of crime, if you are a survivor of harm, you actually have power in our criminal legal system. And the story that Kristen told is a story of a bank that made a choice and said, yes, we're willing to participate in a restorative process. And so I would ask your listeners, if you have been harmed, if you are a survivor of harm, that is something you can ask for. It is something you can demand from your local prosecutors, from state's attorneys, district attorneys. I'm thinking now about colleagues and partners in the sexual violence survivors space. And we partnered with an organization called CASE. They are fierce advocates for those that are survivors of sexual violence and sexual exploitation. I've never met folks who are so passionate about restorative practices than I have from survivors of sexual violence and sexual harm. Because so often the criminal legal system does not give them a voice. And so often survivors of sexual harm and sexual violence don't want to ruin their perpetrators' lives. That's not their intent. And restorative justice gives a space for those that have survived probably the most horrific crime you could imagine, a voice and a space to control what the repair of harm looks like, gives them an opportunity to express their needs without any filter. And for those needs, if done right, to be met and to be addressed. Mm-hmm. So I never thought about that until I listened to Kristen tell that story. So I would invite all your listeners to think about how they can bring restorative justice into spaces where maybe they don't think they have power, but they do. They do.
Yeah. Oh. Well, I feel like time is flying. There's one follow-up question I wanted to ask related to this conversation before I move on, but I'm pretty familiar with restorative justice practices, and in learning about it, you come across people with all different opinions and backgrounds and experiences. The probably more common rebuttal that I've heard is a very simple one, and it's they broke the law. So, period. How have you, in y'all's experience over the years, been able to, I don't want to say convince, but just provide a different perspective that people put a space before even thinking that? Whether it's, like you said, being in the community and getting to know the person, but what is a common way that you respond to that? Is black and white, they broke the law, they should, go through the normal court system and accept whatever they're given? How have you kind of changed people's mind that have kind of experienced that or not been able to?
Yeah, so recently we actually met as a team to talk about our public advocacy strategy. And it was this aha moment for all of us. I said, wow, we're really in the business. We hadn't realized it before, but we're really in the business of changing hearts and minds.
Yeah.
And that's a lot easier said than done.
Yeah.
That is our work. We have an open office plan, Joseph, which has its benefits and it's not so much benefits.
Yeah.
So I can tell you that the other day I'm sitting in my office and our director of legal services got a call from a state's attorney, a district attorney, prosecutor. And this prosecutor had never been exposed to restorative practices until working with our director of legal services on several cases. She called him and said, I have a victim that is asking for restorative practices. It's not your client, but could you help me?
Yep.
I mean, we have changed that person's heart and mind, that she thought about restorative practices, that she welcomed the idea with her victim, that she reached out to experts in the community to help facilitate that practice. So the easiest way to convince somebody about the effectiveness and the transformative power of restorative practices is having them experience them themselves. I mean, that's honestly, like, for us, it is the number one way to knock down that, well, they broke the law. I mean, and even with prosecutors, if we can expose them to the transformative power of restorative practice, they come up with the idea themselves. Look, it happened last week. It's incredible.
Wow.
The other thing I'll say is, if we don't get the opportunity to expose folks and give them the opportunity to be part of a practice, oftentimes we can use money, which isn't motivating to me, but it's motivating to some people. Our criminal legal system is really expensive.
Yeah.
It is really expensive. The story that Kristen told of that young man, 19 years old, with the amount that he was accused of defrauding the bank, he could have spent anywhere from 6 to 30 years in custody.
Yeah.
I mean, it's tens of thousands of hundreds of thousands of dollars, and that young man comes out worse than when he entered the system. I mean, the argument for restorative practices can be an economic one.
It can, yeah, absolutely.
It can be an economic one, that we've invested so much time, energy, resources into a system that has almost completely failed. And what do they say? The definition of insanity is just doing the same damn thing over and over and over again. So we got to stop doing that same damn thing. And restorative justice is the alternative that really has the power to upend systems and build community.
I think the other thing, just very quickly too, the reality is most of these young people, even if they do end up going into custody, they're coming back, and they're going to come back into this community, and most likely, right, as Patrick said, not going to be any better for it, because our system is not rehabilitative as much as some people, like to say. But, in allowing this opportunity, and I think the other thing that I will say as a mental health professional is they are young people. They are going to grow and mature and change. So why not give them the tools while also allowing whoever might have been harmed to have a voice, to be able to say what they need to say. They get to say and do a lot more in a restorative process than they do when they go through the typical system. It's the state of Illinois versus the defendant, right? It's not even that person. And so, we really try to, everybody's voice is important in this. And many, many times our clients either are or at one point were victims of harm as well. And which is oftentimes why they may be in the situation that they're in, with not having gotten services. So I think the biggest thing is, education, but also, we really try to get everywhere we get anybody pretty much who asks for, can we get a circle, or how do we do this, right? We're in, like I said, community center, schools, out on the blocks, on the corner, right? Like doing whatever we can to get it out there and what it is. Because generally speaking, someone experiences it, because it can be a hard thing to explain or to actually figure out what it looks like. But experiencing it really does, majority of the time, people can get a much better understanding of it.
Well, the last two topics that we have to cover, the future plans of Moran Center. So what is the next, 3, 5, 10 years? Obviously, go out of business plan is probably up there. But other than that, what are the other future plans that you all have set up?
Yeah, so I'll tell you that our future plans are based around our get out of business model. We really want to train as many community members as we possibly can in restorative practices, expose people to restorative practices. November, the third week of November, so it's the week of Thanksgiving, is Restorative Justice Week. It's actually an international celebration. And our mayor, Mayor Daniel Biss, the mayor of the city of Evanston, declared the third week of November, right here in our fair city, Restorative Justice Week, which was great. And I got some feedback from folks in the mayor's office, and they said, well, how about if we declare Evanston a restorative city? I said, I don't think we're ready to be declared. We got some work to do. I said, so that really is the future. Like, how can we meaningfully be a restorative city, be a restorative community, and be a model for other communities across the country? Because let me tell you, if we just decide to be the Republic of Evanston and figure out how to be a restorative community, and we don't tell other people how to do it, it is very anti-restorative. Like we should be calling everybody in to this movement. And so that's the future that we see. And it really is about getting out of business. I love being a lawyer. But if I can, hang up that bar license because children are no longer being prosecuted in our courts, I'm happy to hang it up. I'm really happy.
Wow. Engagement. What type of engagement do you look for from outside? Where can people get engaged? Yeah,
sure. So we are on all socials at Moran Center. Nice and simple. So please check out some of our things on there. Again, also just learning more about the Moran Center, our website, kind of getting more engaged in restorative justice and helping us build a more restorative, not only Evanston, but community all around. We're really trying to do that. We also want to mention that all of our services, every service that we have here is completely free. No insurance, no Medicaid, no sliding scale. Everything is free. So we also would ask for, as Patrick said, any sort of donations to help us continue to do that.
Absolutely.
Is obviously very much appreciated so that we can continue to provide that lifeline of services. Those holistic, which is what we truly believe in, services to all of our clients.
Yeah. Wow.
And I would just say, if you have any local attorneys out there who are licensed in the great state of Illinois and want to expunge or seal criminal records, want to, represent that family in a civil issue, we have pro bono opportunities too, and you can contact us via our website for that too.
Absolutely. Well, is there anything that we missed or anything you want to leave us with before we wrap up this interview? We covered a lot.
we did cover a lot. And I just would say, Joseph, thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to share about the Moran Center, about who we are and why we got into this work, for you allowing us to center our clients during this discussion, and for you allowing us to share our vision for the future. So thank you.
Yeah, we really appreciate it.
Well, thank you both so much for your time as well. We're really honored to share the work that you're doing and keep it up. I would love for you all to have to go out of business because there's no need for your services. So I'm with you on that goal as well.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you again so much for your time. Honored to share this.
Thanks, Joseph.
Thanks for listening to Greater Than 0%. To find more episodes or to have your organization featured on the podcast, you can find us at gtzp.org on your preferred streaming or social media platforms. Find your cause with Greater Than 0%.